So I'm spritzing the rough watercolour paper with my spritzer bottle, lots of water, and it's to create really random effects as I experiment with the watercolour. This is the plastic card I'm using. I'm dipping it into all 4 colours, and I will have alternative colours in the description below, but I'm using kind of a red, an earthy colour, a blue and a kind of a grey. And these are the amazing Daniel Smith watercolours, which I love to use because they create such beautiful textures and effects as well as colour. So as you can see here, I'm just sort of printing with the plastic card, and because the paper is wet, it's starting to dilute the tubed paint onto the watercolour paper. What you can see using rough paper is you get a lot more texture. I'm turning the painting upside down. I'm spritzing to dilute the paint and also to mix it because all 4 colours are on the water's edge. So I'm tilting the other way now and spritzing that water's edge to allow the colours to run down to create the look of reflections. Using the plastic card again, getting some of those darker colours, and that's the Hematite Genuine with the Mayan blue, and just sort of painting in some more trees there, the tree trunks and some branches, using the corner of the card to draw with almost. It's a great way of warming up before you start painting in watercolour. So I'm dipping my brush into the blue there and just applying it with the plastic card. And it's so much fun to do. And as I say, this is tubed paint. It's straight from the tube, and I'm just sort of diluting it on the watercolour paper. So I'm tilting again and spritzing that tube paint, allowing it to run down. You get these wonderful random effects there. And again, you blend and mix the colours on watercolour paper. I always find this is great if you have a lot of experience in watercolour or you're just starting out. Anyone can sort of do this and have a go and just play. So I'm using a pipette now, but you could use a twig, and I'm just applying the paint there to create these beautiful thin lines. And when I'm doing this, I feel very freed up. You know, you're creating something that looks natural, like trees and branches, etc. But it's just a wonderful way of applying watercolour without sometimes when you're using a brush, we tend to tighten up. Here, I'm just sort of experimenting and just sort of drawing in the reflections here onto the damp surface and using kind of a scribbling method here. But it's lots of wet in wet and damp into wet work here. I'm literally applying the paint here, scribbling it on and using the side of the pipette as well to create the look of foliage, and just sort of applying these thin dark lines onto the damp surface using some of the dark colours, the blues, the sort of earthy sort of dark red and the dark sort of grey colour, and that's the Hematite Genuine, but you could use Paynes grey or even black. And I'm just creating random effects here, but you kind of almost go with your instincts here and what's happening with your painting as well. Just spritzing here to soften some of those marks, to push them back, to create depth in my sort of semi-abstract painting, and then applying some more paint using the plastic card and making the tree trunks, some of the tree trunks, a little bit larger and bringing some of them forward, again to create depth. And as you see, I'm creating the look of reflections, painting them directly below the trees, but a little bit more broken so it looks like it's water. And I'm applying some darker sort of marks now just below the trees and into the water to look like reflection. And they can be sort of bushes, etc. So it starts to build on this painting. And just printing in some more darks here. And remember, this sort of paint is straight from the tube, and I'm kind of mixing it now as well on the palette. All the colours have been mixed there as well as on the paper. And I'm just pulling up some of the paint here to create thinner lines, and then sort of going up and down to create the look of reflections on some of those lines as well. So it's very loose and very experimental. So I'm using the Pipette again and just applying a little bit more paint. I actually got a little bit of burnt sienna there because I've run out of paint. And I'm just painting some of the branches there in a little bit more detail. This is damp into damp, so it's literally freshly squeezed paint onto the damp surface there. And just adding that detail kind of brings the painting to life a little bit more. If you don't have a pipette, don't worry, you could use a twig from the garden and you can just sharpen it with a pencil sharpener, or you could use the bottom of a paintbrush. And just applying this paint in this way, it kind of makes it unconventional, and then we're not so tight and we can really loosen up and just play. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. And I'm just creating all these sort of scribbly marks going up and down, but they kind of look like lots of detail and foliage and twigs, etc. And just applying a little bit more of the reflections of the trees in the water using that pipette there. And that's pretty much damp into damp as well. And I'm just spritzing here. I felt some of those marks were a bit strong, so I'm tilting and spritzing to dilute the paint and to soften. And I'm actually lifting off now with the plastic card. You need to do this when the paint is damp and not too wet. And I'm swiping here on the water's edge to create the illusion of water. And I must say I was quite pleased with the effect here. Plus I got that sort of red dot in the middle of the water there that almost looked like the sun was setting, and it kind of created a focal point, and that's Mayan Orange, but you could use a red as well. So I think I'm going to leave it there for now. It was a kind of an experiment, a way to loosen up a painting using sort of a recipe at the beginning for the materials that you need to use, but the methods of spritzing and tilting, painting wet into wet and damp into wet. If you'd like to support the content that I create here on YouTube, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? You will get access to my weekly exclusive tutorials and downloadable outline sketches, and you can cancel anytime. Details about the membership can be found in the description below.